Alyson. Welcome to this space, and thank you so much for accepting to come here and share your journey as a coaching supervisor. It would be lovely to hear a little bit about you and your background as a coach. How did your coaching journey start?
Thanks, Andrea. Thank you for inviting me as well. Coaching for me has always been part of what I've done, and my background is HR and learning and development. A fully qualified CIPD member for over 35 years, and always been in a people-centered kind of function. Latterly, in my career in the corporate world, I was involved in talent management, and particularly in succession planning, which involved a lot of career coaching. And I think at that point, I started my coaching journey. So we're probably talking about 20-something years ago, which again, scary when you say that. But in line with the plans that we were working on at the time, I was developing future talent, and a lot of that was coaching them to think about, what they needed to do to step up from that, middle management stage into leadership roles, etc. And I suppose throughout my career, I've always been people-centered and relational. In the work I've done in L&D, I have often done profiles that suggest that I am, a relational type of person. I'm, in my insight profile, I'm very earth green. I'm very supportive. I'm very reflective. The words that people use are that link to coaching are things like cathartic and curious and compassionate. I've recently done another profile that around it's called the Fascinate Advantage Report. I don't know whether you've seen that, and its core says, my key is my thoughtful originality, and I think that's been the theme and the link throughout my career, in terms of the work I've done in HR and L&D, that led me to want to pursue more of a coaching career. So when I left a big corporate 13 years ago, that was a natural way of moving myself forward in my own business, was to work in the space of coaching. And I started as a career coach, which again is probably still one of the main focuses. I love working with people to support them to get their next best move, whatever that looks like, and help them understand themselves when they're sitting in that space of exploration, between their old job and their new job. So career coaching, executive coaching, and I trained as a resilience practitioner during that time as well. So the supporting people going through change and looking after themselves has always been something I'm interested in. So my journey has evolved, and as I've gone along.
Yes, it sounds like this has been always your journey. It's just right. It progressed into coaching and then into supervision, which sounds like the supportive nature and reflective nature that you have fits really well into coaching supervision. How did this desire to train as a coach supervisor come about?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I've always been interested in it, and I suppose that started with my experience of having a supervisor myself. I was lucky enough to have had some fantastic supervisors, and I still do. I worked with a lady called Carol Pemberton, who wrote a book on resilience, and Carol was my supervisor for a while. Absolutely moved me on in terms of my own journey, and it was something that she actually inspired me to want to do. Also with my clients, often when we're talking about their next career move, coaching was something that came up a lot. And one of my clients had trained to be a coach and said, "Oh, would I be her supervisor?" And I actually said, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm not trained." So she said to me, "Well, go and get trained then," which was probably the push in the right direction. But also, the other thing is really learning, and continuous learning has always been something I've done. And it happened that the year in which I did my training, my kind of mantra for the year was growth. And I've always wanted to continue to learn myself. And whilst I was nervous about taking on such a big commitment and all the usual things, can I do this, etc., it seemed like a natural next step. And I have to say the final push was meeting Nick. And I relate really strongly to Nick Bolton, and and as part of his business, and everything that Animas does. I've done several courses with them subsequently, but his whole ethos was really inspiring. And so yeah, after that conversation, it was a no-brainer.
Great. It's great to hear. And as you trained as coach supervisor, what would you say that you loved most, or you love most about being a coach supervisor?
Interesting. What do I love? I think there's a few things. It's enabled me to take my coaching to the next level. And I think when I was doing my training with the cohort, a lot of us said on the program that it makes you reflect on your own skills as a coach, and it enhances those a lot, because you think about, what are your areas that you need to focus on. I learned a lot about different ways of looking. I think I'd always looked inwards when I'm coaching, in terms of what am I giving to the coachee. Supervision has helped me look, more broadly, taking that sort of deeper look as to what's going on in the room, but also to give it a different view. And we talk about the different lenses that we look through when we are in that supervision role. Um, and it's made me reflect a lot on things like, who else is in the room. It's not just you and the coach. And what I also bring to coaching in terms of my style. So you learn a lot about yourself, and as I've already said, I'm quite a reflective person. That I think about, how do I show up in coaching, and then also in supervision. So you learn a lot about things like transference, and is it um, is it my thoughts, or am I transferring my energy levels, or all sorts of things like that. So I think it's allowed me to see things from a different perspective.
It's quite obvious from what you're describing that the supervision training, and as you practice as a supervisor, had quite a big impact on your coaching and on you as a coach, not only as a supervisor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anything that, I mean, I trained as a coach quite a while ago. So anything that allows you to take a step back and say, personally, how am I coaching? Or am I coaching well? It's a question often people come to supervision with, and how effective is my coaching? So it enabled me to do that, as well as to think about some of the, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the challenges that you face when you are in that situation. But that whole reflective space that I think that coaching brings, for me, is just such an important part of my life, and therefore, taking that to the next level with supervision, was, as I say, probably just a natural evolution of my skills. But when I did start the journey, as I say, there was lots of things that were a really good fit for me.
You mentioned challenges. What would be some of the challenges that you faced
Yeah.
out this journey to becoming a supervisor?
It's a great question, isn't it? I mean, we do all learn about ourselves, and some of the challenges, for me, one that has come up throughout, and also comes up a lot for my clients, is boundaries. And obviously learning about boundaries as a coach, how to be there, to want to give yourself, to the situation, wholly, but also not overcommitting or being too directive, or, in terms of things that get in the way. I can't remember whose analogy it was, but somebody talked about, you're more helpful to a coachee if you're sitting on the sideline as opposed to getting in the pit with them. And therefore, the want to make things better, being able to take a step back. I think also balancing your insight and your knowledge without, as I say, influencing or directing people specifically, not falling into that advice trap, which is quite, you sometimes want to say, oh, have you done this or have you tried that? There are ways of being able to give advice without actually, influencing it. But I also think the biggest one for me was trusting myself and that internal radar that comes up. I am quite intuitive, and having the courage to bring that into my practice. Again, Nick talks a lot about courage. He talks a lot about bringing self into the, or use of self in the situation. And I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges for me, is allowing myself, or giving myself permission to show up as a genuine, authentic person, and being measured about it as well.
There's such a, I think it's something that sticks with me, such a journey of growth that comes across from everything that you're sharing. It really comes across how you grew as a person, as a coach, as a supervisor.
Yeah, absolutely. You're always learning, aren't you? You never stop learning. And I mentioned doing other courses with Animas. I've just done the trauma informed coaching, which I think is a fantastic course. And one of the things that struck me around that was one of the particularly good speakers was talking about your use of energy. In my resilience practice, energy is key. But what she'd actually said is, if she wasn't feeling it, then she wouldn't enter into even a coaching or a supervision type session, because it's hard to connect as a genuine person if you're low energy, or if you haven't got anything that you feel you can genuinely bring to the session. So it's because it might affect the client. And and I think you still need to keep reminding yourself on the journey that you are still learning, and sometimes balancing that desire to want to help people with, actually, this is not going to be particularly helpful because I'm not feeling 100% energized today. Then those are the sorts of lessons that keep coming up for me.
It's it reminds me of the integrative approach that ICCS has to the learning, in the sense of it's allowing you that freedom to understand who you are as a coaching supervisor. It's not who you're supposed to be, but giving you that freedom to find out who's Alyson or who's Andrea as a coach supervisor. And it seems that you've really found that space. And you mentioned authenticity and the energy that you bring. Would you say that you've experienced this throughout the course?
Very much so. And I think one thing that struck me in particular was the work we did with Yannick, and his existential theory. I also went on and did his existential course, but he talks about authenticity, and he talks about being an authentic human, and that element fuels effective coaching. I think that was a quote I took from his book. And I do think that whole authentic, genuine self, and it makes you start to think about who are you. And like I said before, bringing your whole self to work, having the courage, having the self-belief, but also things like connecting with my values. One of the things that a client had said to me quite a while ago was that I build long-lasting relationships based on trust and integrity. And values are very important to me. That's a line in my LinkedIn profile. I didn't say that about myself. Somebody else said it about me. But it is a bit of an anchor for me, because values are really important. But back to what you said, Andrea, it's about choice. It's, I love that word choice. I use it a lot with clients. We choose how we show up as a supervisor. With a person-centered approach, I often use that with my clients, saying, what kind of supervisor do you want me to be today? I think that's a great question.
Lovely
Or,
question.
yeah, or what do you need me to be? I love that. I say to people, what do you need right now? When did somebody last ask you what you need?
Exactly. What beautiful questions. Alyson, in terms of what type of clients do you work with predominantly in your coaching supervision?
Well, actually, I have different types of clients. I have a couple of groups, and I have to say, I love the group supervision. One of the groups came together. They studied together as a counselling course together, and they were looking for a supervisor. And I knew one of them very well, and she said, "Would I be interested in taking the group on?" I've been working with those guys now for 3 years, and they are amazing to work with because they know each other quite well, and so it also makes my job quite easy because they give each other feedback and they are very supportive. But that's one of the ones I love doing because they share the space, and and that enables me to direct and support, but they do a lot of the self learning and the peer coaching as well, which is fab. I also work with individuals. I've worked a lot with people who are new to coaching. And I think when I started out, that came up as one of the themes for me, because a lot of that is around allowing people time to reflect on what they have experienced as a coach and just unpack some of those difficult situations. So, it's about helping them develop self-confidence. And I've seen a lot of that with some of the individuals I've worked with that, over a period of time, I can see that transition where they've moved from being somebody who's, am I doing this right, to actually that they are coming to supervision with lots of examples of things that that they have thought about quite often, and just need a little bit more reflecting on or a bit of unpacking. So I think that's probably been my main source of clients. Although I'm developing all the time with different people, but I set out to support newly qualified coaches, um, partly because that's, as I've already said, one of the reasons I got into coaching myself.
Mm. It's interesting how you mentioned that you're working with a group that has studied counseling. And we do find this quite often where coaching supervisors work with not only with coaches, but other people who use coaching maybe as a tool or as an approach. How do you find that work as a coaching supervisor working with a group that studied counseling?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, I don't feel I need to know the ins and outs of what they're doing. The skills, I think, are all the same, really. It's the the holding the space, the reflecting back, the supportive advice, the empathy, the compassion, which are all things that, particularly in the counselling role, come up. But they are also in a very ethical and sort of boundaries regulatory type of approach. So, they're quite easy to work with in that sense if they're already very aware of things like contracting and ethics and confidentiality, and so I suppose in that sort of profession it's quite an easy transference. But what is the same are the issues that they bring. Some of the common challenges that people bring to supervision are very similar. And I was looking back when I was thinking about today, I was looking back through some of my notes that I'd made, particularly around that group, of some of the issues that they bring. and they're not dissimilar to a lot of things that I would imagine most coaches or supervisors experience. So.
We're all working with humans, with lovely, with the right, with us being, and we are right in the same space of being this wonderful human that it's always unpacking and learning and growing and reflecting, and it's a journey.
It is a journey. It is a journey, and and I think it's, I think the biggest thing that they bring is this, being allowing people to become comfortable with uncomfortable feelings sometimes. And you're like, why is that uncomfortable? Why did you feel like that? And the whole think about sometimes when they're working with people that they don't necessarily get on with, that conflict piece, and how do they're uncomfortable with their feelings. They're not sure about their personal reactions to somebody. Why is that triggered a reaction in me? Why is that? Why do I not gel with that client in particular? Is it a value conflict? If it's something else? And yeah, it's fascinating. I've always had an interest in psychology. Probably one of my biggest regrets is never doing a formal study in psychology, but I've done so much reading and listening to podcasts and reading books on that, as you can see from my vast library behind me. I love the whole thing about, why do we do what we do? Like you say, we're so complex as humans.
How would you say that your supervision skills equipped you to support the various types of clients that you work with and the challenges that they bring?
Well, that's a great question. I think it always starts with self, doesn't it? I think you go back to understanding what shaped me, and what I bring. I think that's very helpful. I think it does play to my strengths in that sense. I am quite cathartic. I'm supportive and catalytic. Those are words, the John Herons type words of types of supervision. Very much relate to that. That's always been that a driver for me. Um, and that whole thing about use of self, back to what Nick says, that bringing yourself to the coaching session in that space, reflecting on what's going on, asking for feedback, using insightful questions, challenging, um, and sometimes using a bit of humour as well. Quite often that comes up. I had a lovely quote from one of my, it was actually one of the ladies in the group that I've used, and she said, all of those things, that there's some gentle challenging, there's some insightful questioning, and there's always a smattering or of humour in there as well. So, I think it does enable you to bring a lot of yourself to the, into supervision. I'm not sure I answered that question there. Was that right?
There is no right or wrong, and I really feel like you did answer it in definitely. I like what you mentioned about humor, and because sometimes this supervision space can be challenging for certain coaches to open up about things that their own work is not always an easy space to be in, and to be so vulnerable about the work that you do with others. For some coaches it's easier, for some it's not, or depends on the topic that it's brought or the challenge that they have. So I think humor can sometimes make this space a bit easier. There is the psychological safety, but I think there's a lot that we can do to make this space really safe and comfortable to be vulnerable.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's definitely feedback that I get from clients, that they feel very um, supported and held in that space, and that time for reflection, is really key.
Alyson, what's the future holding for you in terms of a coach supervisor?
Yeah, probably more of the same. I mean, I've really loved the group coaching. I've got a couple of groups, and the dynamics are always different, but seeing people develop and grow. And say initially working with clients that have just come into the field, and in whatever aspect they're doing, seeing that transition is so important with me. So just building on that coaching supervision practice, whether it is groups or whether it's individuals that want to work in the kind of space that I do, as I say, the very cathartic, reflective, catalytic, values-driven space, really. And also, you know, helping people with that sort of thinking about how we can do things differently. One of my mantras or insights that I use often in my coaching is about making things better. And you know, whatever that looks like, particularly when I'm working with career transition, you know, that comes up a lot. Um, and this recent profile I did talked about my thoughtful originality, which is a bit of my anthem as to who I am as a supervisor, and what do I bring to that session. You know, thoughtful originality is really helpful, and I just want to build on some of that. You know, with my clients, just thinking about how I can support anyone in any different type of situation, but very much that whole person-centered approach that I bring, you know, does attract people, and the values piece. Often people say to me, "I want to work with you because I can see that you are values-driven, and that these things are important."
What key qualities would you say or values do you believe that are essential for an effective coaching supervision?
It's a great question. I mean, trust comes up so many times. Trust and integrity, as I've already mentioned, are things that not just trusting yourself, but trusting, you know, the trust within a group. You know, that really does work. Um, what are the values? I think, you know, the compassion, the empathy, the support, the those sorts of things are also really key for me. Um, the being able to, as I say, create that safe space for reflection. Um, Safety is a big thing, I think. You know, and I suppose that's linked predominantly to trust, isn't it? It's about making somebody feel that whatever they need to talk about is fine. So not judging people, you know, maintaining those boundaries, being interested, being curious. We talk a lot about that, and I know again Nick talks about that word. I love that word, being curious. Why is this happening? You know, why is that going on? And genuinely, or really being interested in why you know, this is coming up for you. What is the issue? Is there a theme? Is there a link? I love that, being able to unpack that with somebody or allowing them the space to unpack it themselves. So I think curiosity is a great skill stroke value um, that I also bring to that space, really.
Thank you for sharing, Alyson, your journey and being so so like your genuine, you know, passion for supervision really comes across, and it was lovely to have you here and to hear your very insightful you know, journey. And thank you so much, Alyson.
You're very welcome, Andrea. Thank you for asking me.